Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Art 192, Digital Imaging / Photoshop for the spring semester of 2022. Today, we're going to work on layers. If you have any questions about making selections or working with masks and channels to create refined, soft selections, please let me know, because that's what we covered in the last webinar. So what I have in front of me, I'm going to go ahead and quickly do the lesson here. To the left, I have our start file, and to the right is the finished one, and it is their version of a postcard. Okay, so if we look to the lower right, in the lower right hand corner, you'll see, I'll go ahead and I'll pull off the layers tab. Okay, I'll stretch it down so you can see everything that's here. See all the layers. So in layers, let's start at the top. There is different ways that you can sort these. So for example, if we look at the little button in the upper left-hand corner here, if I click here, I can just view layers based on color, mode, artboard, effect. So for example, let's look at one real quick. Let's look at mode. Okay, and we have normal mode. So what if I were to select multiply? Okay, then all the others, those are the only ones that would be visible. So I'm going to go back again under kind. And then we have other options down here, over here. To the right, you can filter for pixel layers. You can filter for adjustment layers, and we can see that we have a hue saturation one. This is really designed, these little buttons up here, for files that just have a huge number of layers. I rarely have to use them. But for example, if you have, maybe 5, 10 text layers, you only want to see the text layers and nothing else. And this would be a really good way of isolating them temporarily, and you just click on them to turn them on and off. Okay. The next thing down is that if you begin to select a layer, let's go ahead and select the flower here in the upper right-hand corner. A couple of things that you should look at. One is, what mode is it being displayed in? And by default, the normal mode is selected, but notice that we have all of these others down here. Now, as I scroll over these, you'll notice that the image changes considerably. This is something, especially when we work on our next assignment, the movie poster, that you should consider exploring. You can create some pretty amazing effects with your images simply by changing the modes. Okay, and in some cases, it will reduce a lot of your workload. I use multiply all the time when I have black and white images to get rid of the white without having to make a selection. There are other things that I use it for. I'll use overlay, and I'll use soft light and that sort of thing to create some subtle effects in my pieces. So that's important. The other thing is that with each layer, you can adjust its opacity. So again, with the flower selected, I can go over here under the opacity setting, and I can use a slider, or I can type in a number, and it enables you to adjust its opacity, make it more and more transparent or more opaque. By default, it's 100% opaque. All the settings that we've covered so far, and most of them that we see here, are non-destructive, which is really important. I want to keep emphasizing that, to try to work in a manner that minimizes the amount of work that you have to redo in the event that you have to remake a project. So the next thing that we have, aside from the opacity, is that when we look down here, you can lock different aspects of a layer. We can lock its transparency. We can lock the pixels. We can lock its movement. We can lock, I forget what this one is. Looks like a crop, but I'm not sure. Prevent auto nesting. Okay. Never use that. Never, never, never. And this one just locks the whole layer. And then you simply click to unlock it when you're done. Make sure that you have the layer selected, and then you can lock it. And you'll see that there's a little lock sign here. And you just click next to the layer there, or you can, with the layer selected, click on the little lock symbol, and that unlocks it. The next one over is the fill properties. It's similar to opacity, but again, with the flower selected, if I take that back, it looks kind of the same. I never use it. I only use opacity. Anyway, the next thing that we should look at are all the layers themselves. That's what all of these are. To turn a layer on and off, you just simply click the eye icon. And again, if I want to turn the flowers off, and then if I want to turn them back on, I do that. I don't know how many of you have used Adobe Illustrator, but in Adobe Illustrator, even though you may have a layer turned off, it will still print unless you specify that that layer does not print. In Photoshop, it's different. You can create multiple documents contained in one file by simply turning on and off layers. Okay, so if I want one postcard with the flower, I turn the layer on and I print it, or I save it as a separate file. If I want another version without it, a print, you simply turn it off and print it, and it will not print. So that's what this does. And it to hide elements, sometimes you need to hide them in order to make progress with your piece and get certain elements out of the way for the time being. And then you'll also notice on some of these layers, there are effects. So those are the layer effects that we find down at the bottom. The other thing is that when you've applied an effect, that it's nested underneath the layer itself. So we can either turn off all the effects, okay, or we can simply turn off individual effects. And again, it works in a non-destructive way. Very, very nice. Okay. At the bottom, and just to mention that all these layers, can think of them like stacks of paper. The layer at the top is at the top of the stack, and the layer at the bottom is at the bottom of the stack. You can rearrange them. So for example, if I wanted the flower layer to be above or at the very top, I could just click and drag it like so. And in this particular instance, it really doesn't make any difference in the structure of our piece. So I'll go ahead and I'll move it back. I'll move it back down here. I guess it was above the Hawaii. I can't remember where it was. It's not important as long as it looks correct here. So they can also be renamed. So for example, the only one that you can't tinker with is the background layer, which gives you a default layer, and it is locked by default. But as soon as you copy it, notice that what it will do is it will leave the background layer, but it will give you a copy that can be turned on and off. Okay, and it will allow you to change the transparency, and it will allow you to rename it. So to rename a layer, you simply click, double click to highlight it, and then I can just, instead of background copy, I'll just call it, we'll be using this soon. I'll call this one clouds, because we're going to create a clouds layer pretty soon. Okay, and if you want to get rid of a layer, you simply select it and drag it into the little trash can. This these little buttons down here do a variety of different things. For example, if I want both of these, there's 2 pineapple layers here, and we'll get to that in a minute. If you want both of those layers to be linked to one another so that when you move, resize, or do anything to them, they will work in unison with one another. And again, that's something that you can always undo. But for example, they're separate right now. You can see that I have 2 separate layers of the pineapple. But if I select both of them by holding down the Shift key and clicking both, or you can use the Command key. The Shift key allows you to select a whole slew of them at once. So if I click the top layer, hold down the Shift key and select this bottom layer, notice that they're all selected. Likewise, if I unclick or don't hold down the Shift key and just click on one is selected. If I want to select individual layers, hold down the Command or the Control key, and it allows me to select, layers out of order. Okay. To link these 2 together, the pineapple that I was talking about, we can select both of them by holding down the Shift key and click on the little link, and you'll notice that that link appears there. So now when I move the layers, they work in unison, they move in unison with one another. Or if I were to resize them or rotate them, the same thing would be true. If you want to unlink them, select them and click the link. Again, you need a layer to be selected to be able to add the effects layer. There's lots of different blending options that you have available to you. You can add bevel and emboss. You can add strokes or outlines to the layers, which we will do in this exercise. You can add inner shadows. You can add outer shadows. You can add something called a satin finish. There's a whole bunch of them here, and probably one of the most popular ones is at the bottom, and that's your drop shadow down there. The next one over is one that I use a lot, which is adding a layer mask. Again, it's a good way of making a selection. For example, look at this top. Let me turn off this pineapple and select this one. And let's say I want to make a layer mask and I want to work in a non-destructive way. There's a couple of ways that I can do that. So for example, if I select, let's select the rectangle tool. There we go, right there. And I click and I drag to make a selection. Come on, why aren't you doing that? Let's go ahead. Is it locked? It may be locked, it may not. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag again. There we go. Okay, so I have a selection. And again, if I use the move tool, if you recall from our selections demonstration, it functions as a cookie cutter. Okay. If I want to make a copy of this and put it on a new layer, which we can do, we'd hit Command or Control J. And now you'll notice that if I turn off the pineapple, it leaves a copy of that selection that I had just made in the exact place. And you'll do that a lot when you want to sandwich elements between one another. Okay. The other thing that you can do with this too is that we can use this next button down here, which, as I said, is a layer mask. So if I wanted to hide everything else on that layer, but reveal only that area, I would click on that. And what makes that really nice is that I have not destroyed my original image. I've just created a temporary mask that initially is linked to it. And if I ever want to get rid of it and bring that image back, I just simply click on the mask and drag it into the trash can. It will ask me, do I want to apply the layer or delete it? I just want to delete it. And now it brings back the pineapple. If I select it and I hit delete, then that's a permanent change. Again, thinking more in terms of non-destructive. If you have lots and lots of layers and you need to organize them in groups, then the next one here is a little a group folder that you can make. The one after that is, so again, that's mostly if you have a lot of layers that you're using and you want to, organize them a little bit better. The next one is if you want to create a new layer, you select that one like so. So that's one way of doing it. If you want to throw the layer away, you select it, hit the trash can icon, it will get rid of it. Or again, if you want to make a copy, you just simply click on it and you drag over the new layer, and that will make a new copy of it. Okay. So if you want to make a copy, click and drag it. As I said, what I can do is I can drag that there and it will make it. Another way of making a copy of the layer is just Command J, and I've got a copy of it. Okie doke. So that's the layers panel. I suggest if you haven't already, get acclimated to it. I have it up at all times. And I mean at all times. It's really important because you're constantly adjusting and working with layers as you're building your illustration, painting, whatever you want to call it. The next thing that we'll work on here is looking at our new file that is our start file. And you can see that they have a little postage image here. Got to make sure that I have the right layers selected if I'm going to move it in position. Whoops, come on. There we go. Now I can move it. Oh, if you have to click on the element itself, if you click on the other one, that would be a good reason for maybe locking the layer so you don't accidentally move it. But anyway, if you click directly on the element of that layer, it moves around and we can isolate it, do what we want. We also have another one with the word Hawaii that we will add a gradient to, and we'll also add an outline to it using layer effects. Then we have our pineapple and our flower, and that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn off the flower, and we're going to work and start by building some clouds in the background here. So beneath the background layer, I want to create, I'll go ahead and make a copy of it like so. So we have a background copy. I'm going to name it clouds, just like I did in the other one. Okay. And where you're going to use a rendering filter for that, make sure that it is selected. And then on our foreground and background color, I'm going to select the foreground color here. And I want this to be kind of a bluish color. So maybe I'll click from a light blue in here. There we go. So my foreground color is blue, my background color is white. And then with that layer selected, I can go to filter, and I can go to render. And then I want to say render clouds. And it comes up with a cloud pattern. Not bad. It works in some instances, and sometimes they do look computer generated. So I don't use them that much, but in this particular use for this lesson, they work pretty well. And every time you hit it, if I go back up to filter and I select Shift Command F or Shift Control F on the PC, I'm going to get a different pattern of clouds. And when you get a pattern that you feel comfortable with, then go for it. Just leave it. Okay. And you notice that my color for my background is a little bit different because I picked a different foreground color. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to manipulate the pineapple. We want something that looks a little bit nicer. It looks a little bit more robust, a little bit more intense in colors. So there are a variety of ways of doing that. What we're going to do in this lesson is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a copy of it. So I'll select the layer, hit Command J. And then on the overlay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change the mode. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm going to go from normal and I'm going to go through here. And as I drag through them, you'll notice that I see a lot of different variations on that. Most of them I don't like. Screen is close. Dodge isn't bad. If I select overlay, that's probably a good one. That's probably the one that I want. Soft light works very similar to that. Multiply is just too dark. So multiply is one of my go-to modes. Overlay is another one, and soft light is another that I use very frequently. I'm just going to use the overlay. And notice that the pineapple, now with those two images layered on top of one another, and we change the mode of the one on top, looks much richer. If I turn that off, it looks a little kind of washed out, not all that interesting. Okay. So let's move on up here to the flower. So we'll select that, and I'm going to make sure that it's turned on. They added a few things to this. They added a satin finish, and they added a drop shadow, and that's done under the effects here. So if I select the effects and I select the drop shadow, notice that it brings up a dialog box. And from here, with the layer effects selected, we can adjust the angle of the shadow. We can adjust the distance of the shadow. We can adjust the spread of the shadow. We can adjust the size of the shadow. So do you want it a sharp, crisp shadow, or do you want it kind of soft? That's used a lot. I use it a lot, probably overuse it for type to make sure that the type stands out against the background. The other thing that they want us to use in here is the satin finish. I don't want black though. I want to pick kind of a nice rosy kind of color. If I select theirs though, let's go back over here. Let me cancel that and cancel this. And I'm going to come back to theirs, and with the flower selected, I'm going to look at the satin settings to see what they put in there. They used that hot pink, and opacity was 20%, and they changed the angle to 19. We can follow all of these if we want. So I'm going to go back again, and I'm going to select mine. And I'll get close to it. Maybe not exactly the same, but I'll go ahead and go to FX, add my drop shadow, pull that out of the way, make sure that that's where I want it. We'll go ahead and I'll change the size a little bit. Go ahead and move the spread a little bit. Make sure that the angle is the way we want it. And I'm good with that. And then let's go ahead and select satin. Let's go back here and let's select hot pink. Okay. 60%, they wanted maybe 20%, so it's not quite so intense. But it does, there are various ways using these layer effects of increasing the intensity of colors, of doing a variety of things to the image without permanently destroying it. Because as soon as I click OK, you'll see that I have satin and drop shadow, and I can always turn them on, turn them back off. Let me go back here under drop shadow. And I want to make sure under drop shadow that is black. I may have goofed up here. There we go. So that's there. Got that. Let's crank that up again. And under satin, that's the pink. Okay. So I'll go ahead and I'll click OK. Okie doke. So we've adjusted a flower. We have enhanced the pineapple. We've added clouds through rendering to the background. And now what we want to do is we want to add another image to this. We want to add a beach image here. So there's a couple of ways that we can do that. I can go to File, Open. So I actually have, let's say, open. I can browse and bridge, or I can open the existing file. Here's flower, here's the family photo, here's here's the beach scene. I'll go ahead and open that. Now we have another Photoshop file. There we go. So now what I can do is there's a couple of ways of doing this. The best way of doing it, I think, is simply select the move tool, click and drag and move over your file, and then drag back down, and it appears. Now you can see that it's in front of all the other layers. I want to move it down. So I can physically move it down by clicking and dragging on the layer and moving it down here, maybe above the pineapple, but below the flower and below the stamp from the postage stamp. Or okay. Now the next thing that we want to do with it, I can move it in position here, as we want to reduce it in size. We want to rotate it, and you'll notice in the final version, we have a little white outline. All of these are, again, non-destructible things. So with the image selected, and I can rename it beach scene. Just name it beach. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command T or Control key T on the PC. And I'm going to hold down the Shift and the Option key, and it will resize like so. That's about right. Let me undo that just to make sure. I want to make sure that I don't accidentally redo the I don't want to distort the image anyway. So I'm just going to click and drag and hold down the Shift key. Get it about the right size. Then move over the corner, and with a little double arrow, I'm going to go ahead and I'm able to move my mouse and rotate it. And now what I want to do is I'm going to turn off, it's really bugging me, the postage for right now. And let's go back and let's select the beach again. And now I'm going to add another layer effect. And what I want to do for that is add a stroke. So we'll make sure that the color of the stroke is white. We'll come back up here. Okay, I want to make sure that it's a little bit bigger. And again, you can always go back and you can change this. Let's make it a 4-point, 5-point rule. And then you can decide, do you want it on the inside? Do you want it on the outside? Or do you want it right centered? I'm going to go ahead and make it on the inside, just for the heck of it. Now I've added a nice little drop shadow to that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take care of the postage. I'll go ahead and I'll turn that back on. After right click that, and we'll turn that back on. And I'm going to change the opacity of a little bit. So I'll come back in here and we'll change the opacity of that layer. Make sure, see, I don't have the right layer selected. I got to make sure that I do that. Select the postage, come back, and we'll turn that down a bit. And make sure that I click directly on a part of that image so that when I move it, yeah, see, I don't have it selected. I'll move it in place. There we go. So we'll move it in place. So we're nearly done with this thing. The next thing that we want to do is that we want to turn on the type that they provided for us. Where did the type go? I'll turn that. So with this, we want to add a gradient and we want to add an outline. The trick is when you add the gradient, how do you make sure that you apply it to only the type itself? Now, this is just an image of type. It is not editable. Okay. So to do that, I first need to pick my color. So I'm going to go ahead and here. Let's pick a nice orange from over here. I want something a little bit brighter. Oh, come on, come on, come on. Let's see. I'll pick it from over here. That looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit darker. Nice bright orange. I don't know if I have exactly the right color or not, but close enough for government work, right? Anyway, in order to add a gradient, don't do it this way. I'll select the gradient tool, and then I'm going to click and drag on this layer, making sure that I have Hawaii selected. And when I click and I drag, and I hold down the shift key to constrain it, it fills the whole thing. I don't want that. I want it to fill only in the word Hawaii. So a quick way of selecting Hawaii without using any other selection tool is to hold down the command or the control key on the PC and click on the little icon in layers. And you'll notice that we get the marching ants around the text. Now I can go over to the gradient tool. And when I click and I drag, it will only be applied to inside that. But even doing that, I would rather not do, because instead I would rather create a brand new layer on top of that. So I leave my original I don't want that. I'm trying to get a brighter orange here. Oh, close enough. So now I can go ahead, and again, thinking in terms of working non-destructively, if I click and I drag like so, I'll click and I drag a little bit more. I'm going to keep adding it a little bit more. It's too much. Let's go back. And don't have the right orange, but that's okay. Again, the farther you click that, the farther the gradient will be pulled up. So I've got a gradient that's only applied to that area of the layer and nothing else. Now I can deselect. Now what I want to do to that layer is add an effects to it. And I will go ahead and I'm going to click on stroke. Okay, bring that up. Let's create our, make our green color here instead of the white that we used before. And I'm going to pick a color from over here. I'm going to pick a green from inside, maybe a little bit lighter. A little bit lighter green inside our photograph here. How about in here? I want a nice bright green. So I'll go ahead over here and select that. There we go. So I'll click that. Now you can see that I've added green to it, a little stroke around it. I can go ahead and I can increase the size of the stroke a little. We can decide whether we want it, again, on the inside, maybe centered. That does a nice job for us. And we're set to go. Okay. The last thing that they want us to do, and then that will be it for today, is they want us to add some text down. Oh, no, they don't. There's one other thing they want us to do before I add the text below, is to show you a different way of adding. Let's go ahead and click OK. A different way of adding an image that you don't even have to open up the Photoshop file to incorporate it. So in lesson 4 folder, you'll notice that we have flower number 2. It is a Photoshop file already. It's been also isolated. All I have to do is click and drag on it and bring it in here. And there you go. Without even opening the file, I can go ahead and I can move it into place. I can maybe resize it if I need to. And now, because I had the top layer selected, I need to move it down. Another way of moving layers up and down is to hold down the command or the control key and then hit, let's see, command key, and make sure I've got this right. Nope, I don't want to do that. Let me go ahead and fix it in space. There we go. So now if I hit Command left bracket, it's moving down. And as long as it's down below the text, but it's above the pineapple, I'm in good shape. They do want us to do one more thing to that. They wanted us to add another filter to it. I'm going to pass on that for right now. And we're going to focus on the text down here. So if I look at the finished one, I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the text tool to see what text that they did use. And the text settings, they used Birch Standard Regular. And if we go over and we look under Window and we look at the character settings, we'll go ahead and bring that up. We can see that what they've done. We're going to talk about text in another week. But for right now, to do something really basic with it, they've set it at 32 point. The leading is auto set. We have right now, kerning is automatically set. They've increased the tracking a little bit, so the type is spread out a little bit. And now what I can do with the text tool, and I'm going to use the same green that we did before, is I'm going to go ahead and I want it to be centered. So now I can come down here, make sure that I have, undo that. Let's click OK. I've got the wrong file selected. Let's select my file. And I want it to be, it can be on the same layer as Hawaii. So I'll select that or even above. So I'll go ahead and with those settings selected, and I want the type to be centered. I prefer it centered for right now. And I'll select the type tool and we can click anywhere. And it gives us some Greeking. And now I can type in here, put caps lock on and name it, type it Island Paradise. Okay, and now when I'm done, click the little check button and I can move it in place with the move tool. I'll move it down here. It's kind of hard to read though. So this is an indication of a good time to use a drop shadow. So again, using the layer, making sure that I have the layer selected. Another nice thing in here is that when you do use type, it automatically creates its own layer. And you'll see in the layer that is at the top, it's denoted with a T for editable type. And then whatever text you've used, whatever letter forms you've used, it spells it out. So you know which layer is which. Now I can go ahead and I can add another drop shadow again. I want this to be a little bit bolder. Want the same angle. Let's change the distance a little bit. And this will help it pop out a little bit more so that it becomes a little bit more readable. Okay, reduce the size of it a little bit, make it a little bit sharper. And then if we want, we can add one more thing just for the heck of it. We can go ahead and add bevel and emboss. And this is kind of a cheater way of making the type look three-dimensional. And again, we have all these settings that we can play with. I'll just leave it for right now. And there you have it. We've taken several images and done a variety of things with them. All of that in probably a little bit more than a half an hour. Okay, if I go back to this file, I'm going to revert to saved just to see what comes up here. There we go, because I wanted to select the other flower down here, and I wanted to look at what they did to it. Yeah, they added a different effect. So hold on here. flower 2. I forget what they did to it. Again, it's a, because it is, oh, they added hue saturation to it, adjustment layer right on top. So we do have the time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So directly above, let's go back over here. I'm going to select flower 2, and I'm going to apply an adjustment layer to it. So I'm going to use hue saturation. That one is right here. Okay. And now what I can do is I can shift the color, I can shift the saturation. If I select the hue, and I move it, notice what it's doing. But it's affecting all of them underneath. I don't want that. I just want it to affect the flower and nothing else. So I'm going to reset it. I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move over in between with my mouse, the hue saturation layer now and flower 2. I'm going to hold down the Option or Alt key. And you'll notice how the icon changes. And by clicking on that, it insets it and it will affect only that particular layer beneath it. So now when I go ahead and I change the color of it, and again, it's really nice because it's non-destructive. So I've turned that violet flower into something that looks a little bit more pink, and I can always turn it off and return it to its original condition. So again, emphasizing non-destructive. So there you have it. Any questions before we leave today? Let me go ahead and I see a few more people have joined us. I'm going to go ahead and check you guys off. Make sure that you're here. So that's working with layers. Layers came out in version 3 of Photoshop. It was really a pain before they introduced layers. You had to save a lot. You only had like one undo, Command Z, Control Z, whatever. And it was hell to get what you wanted. It was really a nuisance. Even with version 2, it wasn't until 3 when they added layers that I thought there was a kind of a sigh of relief. It made things much easier. But even the adjustments that you added, they weren't adjustment layers, it was destructive. So you had to really think carefully about the process that you were going through in developing your illustration or your ad or whatever you want to call it, and save frequently, because every time you did something, almost every time, it was destructive. So you had to make sure, by saving often, that you could go back to a previous version and not have to waste too much time in remaking what you had done previously, but with the necessary changes. Okay. Any questions from you guys? You're okay with your postcard assignment or your selfie photo bomb, whichever you chose to do? Of this, I will have it posted in about an hour. There should be one already up in modules from previous semester that won't be too different. And it will be under the layers chapter. Let me see if I can't find it real quick. I've got the class here. Here's the course. Let me look at modules. And if I scroll down here, layer basics right here. So here is the lecture 5 video. And that's the one that I've done that is older, but it will be almost identical. This is a part of a textbook that has not been changed in eons. It's the same from version to version to version. But I will post this one in this semester's recordings as well. Okay. Are we good? Okie doke. Well, if we're good, then I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and I will end this session in a few minutes. Have a good weekend. Look forward to seeing everybody's postcards. Okay. Bye-bye.